By 6:30 on Thursday evening, everyone else at Northline Studio had gone home, except me, the cleaning crew, and whoever kept forgetting to turn off the conference room lights. I was still at my desk because one of the junior architects had discovered, 10 minutes before payroll closed, that his new insurance plan did not include the specialist treating his daughter. He had looked at me with the kind of panic people usually reserved for medical bills and lost passports, and I had said what I always said. I'll fix it. That was the easiest version of me to understand. I was the man who stayed late, knew which forms required blue ink, and kept spare painkillers in his bottom drawer. I remembered whose child had asthma, whose mother was having surgery, and which employees needed their pay deposited a day early before a holiday weekend. People liked me. More accurately, people liked having me nearby when something went wrong. I was on hold with the insurance company when my personal phone began vibrating against the desk. The number was unfamiliar, local, and persistent. I let it ring out once. It called again before the insurance company's recorded music completed its loop. Adrian Shaw speaking. A woman said my name back carefully, as though checking every syllable against a form. This is St. Catherine's Medical Center. Are you in a private place? My fingers stopped above the keyboard. Yes, I said, although the entire office floor was made of glass walls and open desks. She confirmed my date of birth, then asked whether I knew a Graham Vale. I looked automatically across the office toward the dark monitor and empty chair, less than 50 feet from mine. Of course I knew Graham. Everyone at Northline did, in the way people knew the building would be warm before they arrived, and the elevators would work, unless the city itself gave up. He coordinated repairs, handled vendors, checked alarms, and appeared beside malfunctioning printers, with the grim patience of a man being personally insulted by office equipment. I had worked near him for 2 years. I did not know his middle name. I know him from work, I said. Why? The woman told me there had been a cycling accident. Graham had a head injury and a fractured wrist. He was stable and awake, but I was listed as his emergency contact. For several seconds, I thought she had said the wrong name. I'm listed as what? His emergency contact. I stood so quickly my chair rolled backward into the filing cabinet. She confirmed my phone number and said I was the only person listed. I stared at Graham's desk, as if an explanation might be taped beneath his keyboard. We had spoken hundreds of times, but only in the small practical language of coworkers. I had asked him to lower the heat in the benefits room. He had told me the heating system was older than both of us, and possibly vindictive. I had thanked him for fixing my desk chair. He had shrugged and said he was tired of watching me lean left. Once, during a fire drill, his hand had settled against my lower back to guide me through a closing door. I had remembered the weight of it longer than I should have. I wrote the hospital address on the back of an enrollment form, then finished the insurance appeal before leaving. It took 22 minutes. I hated myself a little for counting. Outside, Chicago had disappeared into cold November rain, the kind that came sideways between buildings and made every taxi roof look blurred. I had forgotten my umbrella, which was so predictable I could almost hear Graham pointing it out. During the cab ride, I opened our company directory and read his profile as though it belonged to a stranger. Graham Vale, Senior Facilities Coordinator, 5 years at Northline, Emergency Response Certification. No photograph, no personal information. I searched our old messages next. Most were requests about frozen conference rooms, broken doors, and one mysterious puddle beneath a copier. The obvious explanation was a clerical mistake. The less obvious explanation was that Graham had no one else. That possibility sat beside me for the rest of the ride. I knew how a life could look full from the outside, because you were useful inside other people's lives. You could attend every office birthday, bring soup when someone was sick, and answer every late-night call, then return to an apartment where nobody noticed whether the lights came on. My former boyfriend had once told me I made life easier. He meant it as praise. 3 months later, he left, because easier was not the same as wanted. I had spent the year since pretending that distinction no longer bothered me. St. Catherine's smelled like disinfectant, burnt coffee, and wet wool. At the emergency desk, a nurse asked who I was there to see. Graham Vale. She asked my relationship to him. Coworker sounded too small. Emergency contact sounded like I was claiming something I did not understand. I work with him. The nurse checked her screen. You're Adrian? The recognition in her voice made my stomach drop. He's been asking whether you arrived. She led me beneath flat white lights and past curtained bays where machines beeped without rhythm. Before drawing back Graham's curtain, she warned me that he had a mild concussion, a fractured left wrist, and significant bruising. Try not to overwhelm him with questions, she said. That won't be difficult. I don't know which questions I'm allowed to ask. Graham was upright in the hospital bed, but for a moment, I did not recognize him. At work, he always looked assembled. Shirt buttoned, sleeves rolled evenly, every movement deliberate. Here, his dark hair was damp and disordered. A narrow bandage crossed his temple. His left arm rested in a temporary splint, and purple bruising had begun to spread above the collar of his torn gray shirt. His eyes were closed. A paper cup sat on the tray near his injured hand, so I moved it to the other side before I thought about what I was doing. Graham opened his eyes. They found me immediately. He did not look confused or ask why I was there. The strain in his face eased with such quiet certainty that it unsettled me. You came, he said. His voice sounded scraped raw. I pulled the visitor chair closer, but remained standing. Apparently, you were very confident I would. Relief crossed his face, followed by discomfort, then the familiar restraint sliding back into place. I should have told you. That I'm your emergency contact? Yes. That would have been a useful conversation. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, but pain interrupted it. I sat. Rain traced uneven lines down the narrow window behind him. His uninjured hand rested open on the blanket, scraped across the knuckles. I wanted to ask why my name was on his form, where his family was, and whether anyone else knew enough about him to be frightened. Instead, I pushed the water toward his hand. Drink. You look terrible. He took the cup. You always know what to say. I work in benefits. Compassion is mostly paperwork and hydration. His fingers shook once before tightening around the cup. A doctor entered and explained that Graham could probably go home that night, provided someone stayed with him for the first 48 hours. He needed monitoring for worsening concussion symptoms, help managing medication, and transportation to a follow-up appointment. The doctor asked whether that would be possible. Soothed, Graham looked down at the blanket. I waited for him to mention a brother, friend, neighbor, anyone whose name made more sense than mine. He said nothing. The silence answered more than he seemed willing to. I should have asked for time to think. I should have remembered that being needed was not the same as being chosen. Instead, I heard myself say, I can stay. Graham lifted his head. There was no triumph in his expression, only quiet relief he tried and failed to hide. The doctor continued explaining warning signs, but I barely heard him. I was watching the man who had worked less than 50 feet from me for 2 years and somehow trusted me with the part of his life people usually reserved for family. Graham waited until the doctor stepped outside, then looked at the water in his hand. You don't have to do this, he said. Apparently, I already agreed. That isn't what I meant. I know. For once, neither of us hid behind a joke. The discharge process took another hour because Graham kept insisting he felt fine, and the nurse clearly knew his type. By the time we reached the hospital entrance, the rain had softened into a cold mist. Graham stopped beneath the awning and stared at the curb where taxis slid past in streaks of yellow. I can get home. His left arm was immobilized against his chest. His face had gone pale beneath the bruising, and he was swaying slightly. You can barely stand still. Standing still is overrated. So is pretending a concussion is a personality trait. He gave me a look that would have been intimidating if he had not immediately closed his eyes against the light. The cab driver helped me maneuver Graham into the back seat. I climbed in beside him because the nurse had warned me not to let him fall asleep during the ride. Graham leaned his head against the window and watched Chicago pass in wet reflections. I asked for his address. He recited it without opening his eyes, then added, "Fourth floor, elevator works." Of course you'd know. I had it serviced last month. You service your own apartment elevator? I complained professionally until someone else did. His voice was dry, but his breathing had become shallow. I kept talking because silence felt too close to worry. I told him about the insurance appeal I had finished before leaving. He opened one eye. You stayed to finish that? A child needed coverage, and I was already at the hospital. Exactly. His mouth tightened, as though the answer bothered him. Graham lived in a brick building on a narrow street lined with bare trees and cars shining under rain. The lobby smelled faintly of radiator heat and someone's dinner. He tried to carry his own discharge bag. I took it from him. He tried to press the elevator button with his injured hand. I moved his arm gently aside. You're going to make this very difficult, aren't you? I usually manage my own buttons. Tonight you're delegating. To payroll? Benefits, technically. That explains the lack of practical skill. His dry humor made him feel less breakable. It also made me aware of how close we stood in the elevator, his shoulder nearly touching mine. His apartment was quieter than I expected. Not empty, exactly. Deliberate. Dark wood shelves, clean counters, a charcoal sofa, and framed architectural sketches arranged with almost mathematical precision. There were no family photographs. No shoes beside the door, except his. No second coat hanging from the hooks. Graham unlocked the door one-handed, then stood just inside, as if uncertain what came next. You can take the couch, he said. You're the one with the head injury. My bed is upstairs. I looked toward a narrow staircase leading to a loft. You are not climbing that tonight. Adrian. Graham. We stared at each other until he sighed. You're enjoying this. Immensely. I made him sit on the sofa while I read the discharge instructions again. Every 4 hours, medication, no alcohol, no screens for long periods. Wake him periodically, watch for confusion, vomiting, worsening pain, or unusual behavior. I looked up at the last item. How would I recognize unusual behavior? I listed a coworker as my emergency contact without telling him. Fair point. He rubbed his uninjured hand over his face. I lowered my voice. Where do you keep the medication you normally take? Bathroom cabinet. Extra blankets? Hall closet. Food. Kitchen. That answer was almost insulting. You asked where I keep food. I was hoping for something more specific than the room designed for it. The kitchen revealed the first practical problem. Almost everything Graham used daily was stored above shoulder height, as though he had organized the apartment under the assumption that he would always have 2 working hands. I moved a stack of plates to the counter, placed a mug near the kettle, and brought the medication bottles to the table. Graham watched me with the tense expression of a man observing a stranger rearrange his internal organs. I'll put it back, I said. That isn't necessary. You look like you're planning to restore everything the second I leave. I might? Then I'm moving the coffee too. He looked genuinely alarmed. I opened the cabinet and found a bag of the same dark roast we used at work, a carton of oat milk, and the cinnamon powder I added when the office kitchen had it. I held up the carton. You drink oat milk? No. Then why is this here? Graham's gaze moved from the carton to my face. You do. I've never been here before. You work late. Sometimes I bring coffee back to the office. You keep my milk in your apartment in case you decide to bring me coffee? It lasts longer than regular milk. That is not an explanation. It's part of one. He looked exhausted enough that pushing further felt cruel, so I poured water into a glass and set it beside his uninjured hand. He stared at it for a moment, then looked at me in a way I could not read. What? Nothing. He picked up the glass carefully. Thank you. I found soup in the freezer and heated it while Graham gave unhelpful instructions from the sofa. He objected when I chose the wrong pot, objected when I used too much water, and objected when I called the soup beige. It's roasted cauliflower. That is a dignified name for beige. You're ruining it. I'm reheating it. Aggressively. By the time I brought the bowl over, his shoulders had relaxed. He tried to hold it in his lap, and immediately lost his grip with the wrong hand. I caught it before it tipped. Both of us held the bowl, my fingers over his. Graham went still. So did I. His hand was warmer than mine. "I've got it," I said, though neither of us moved right away. After he ate, I helped him out of his damp canvas coat. The sleeve caught against the splint, and Graham's jaw tightened as I eased the fabric around his wrist. I had to step close enough to feel the heat of him through his torn shirt. He smelled like rain, antiseptic, and something clean beneath both. "Tell me if I'm hurting you. You'll know. Because you'll say something? Because I'll stop being polite." "You've been polite?" His breath warmed the side of my face. A brief, tired laugh escaped him, lower than I had heard at work. I looked up and found him watching me, not with surprise, but with an attention that felt established. I set an alarm for midnight and another for 4 in the morning. Graham protested until I reminded him the doctor had specifically told me to wake him. "You don't have to stay awake all night." Good, because I wasn't planning to. I arranged a blanket on the armchair beside the sofa. He looked at it, then at me. "There's a guest room upstairs. Next to the bed you're not allowed to climb to? You could use it." "And leave you down here alone?" "I'm 20 feet away, and up a staircase." He studied my face with a strange mixture of frustration and something gentler. "You always do this? Sleep in terrible chairs? Make it impossible for people to refuse your help." I folded the blanket more sharply than necessary. "You're the one who put my name on the form." The words sat between us. Graham looked down at the white edge of his splint. I expected him to explain, but he only said, "I'm sorry." It was the first thing he had said all evening, without a shield around it. My irritation weakened. "We'll talk about it when your brain is less bruised." Convenient. For both of us. He lay back, and I turned off the lamp nearest his face. Within minutes, his breathing slowed. I remained in the chair, listening to the building settle around us. At midnight, I woke him, checked his pupils the way the nurse had shown me, and handed him medication with fresh water. He swallowed, then watched me over the rim of the glass. "You remembered," he murmured. "It's been 4 hours." Not that. Before I could ask what he meant, his eyes closed again. I sat there, with the empty medication packet in my hand, trying to understand a man who seemed to speak most clearly when he was too tired to stop himself. Near dawn, I woke to the smell of coffee. Graham was standing unsteadily in the kitchen, one-handed, pouring from a French press while his injured arm rested against his chest. "Are you trying to go back to the hospital?" He glanced over his shoulder. On the counter beside him was a mug prepared exactly the way I drank it at work. Dark roast, oat milk, a little cinnamon, no sugar. "You looked uncomfortable," he said. "I thought coffee might help." I stared at the cup. "How did you know?" Graham placed it within my reach. "You've ordered the same thing every morning for 2 years. The coffee should not have mattered as much as it did." It was only a mug with cinnamon dust floating unevenly across the surface. Still, I carried it back to the armchair, as though Graham had handed me evidence. For 2 years, I had assumed our interactions belonged to ordinary workplace convenience. A repaired chair, a heater switched on before a presentation, an umbrella appearing beside the west exit on days when I forgot mine. I had credited the building, chance, or whoever managed supplies. Graham stood at the counter, pale and stubborn, pretending the French press had not required more effort than his body could spare. "Sit down. You're giving orders in my kitchen. You made coffee with a concussion. I've earned jurisdiction." By the end of that morning, staying one night had quietly become staying until his follow-up appointment. Graham accepted the arrangement with a small nod that made it look temporary. I called our office manager and said he would be out for several days. I did not mention that I was sitting in his apartment wearing yesterday's clothes, while he argued that toast counted as breakfast. "It has grain," he said. "So does whiskey. You're judgmental before 8. I'm judgmental all day. You just haven't spent enough time with me." The words left his mouth before either of us could pretend they meant nothing. Graham looked down at his plate. I spread jam over a second piece of toast and acted as though I had not heard the invitation hidden inside them. We developed a routine faster than made sense. I worked remotely at the dining table while Graham rested on the sofa, answering vendor questions in short messages he was not supposed to send. Every few hours, I set water and medication beside his right hand. At noon, he complained that I had reorganized his cabinets incorrectly. In response, I labeled the lower shelves with sticky notes. Plates, mugs, things Graham pretends he can reach. He read the last one and said, "You realize you'll have to remove these before you leave." I looked at his neat handwriting on the grocery list beneath my notes. "You realize you'll have to ask me to leave first." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Cooking dinner became a negotiation between my limited skill and Graham's inability to let a recipe defend itself. He sat at the counter while I attempted pasta with mushrooms. "The pan is too hot," he said. "Heat is its purpose, not cremation. You could be more encouraging." "I'm encouraging the mushrooms to survive." When I reached across him for the salt, my chest brushed his shoulder. Graham stopped speaking. His good hand rested against the counter between us. I could have moved away immediately. I did not. Then the sauce began to hiss, and he said too quickly, "Turn it down." I did, but the warmth beneath my skin had nothing to do with the stove. The next morning, I took him to the clinic. Graham insisted on wearing a charcoal button-down instead of the loose sweatshirt I suggested. He managed the first few buttons one-handed, then his fingers slipped. "I can do it. At this rate, your appointment will become a dinner reservation." I stepped closer and fastened the rest. My knuckles brushed the warm skin at the base of his throat, and his gaze dropped to my hands. "Too tight?" "No." His answer came out quieter than usual. Outside, rain pushed under the clinic awning. Graham used his good hand to straighten my scarf and tuck the loose end beneath my coat collar. He did it without comment, as though he had been doing it for years. The doctor confirmed that Graham's concussion symptoms were improving, but warned him not to return to work too soon. His wrist would need a cast, followed by several weeks of restricted movement. On the ride home, he grew quiet. "You've missed 2 days of work because of me." "I'm still working." From my dining table, "Your chair is better than mine. I fixed yours." I turned toward him. "You replaced one wheel and tightened the back support." "I thought maintenance did that." "I am maintenance. Facilities. Thank you." He looked out the window, but I caught the faintest smile reflected in the glass. Back at the apartment, Graham asked me to find his insurance paperwork in the desk upstairs. I found the folder beneath a black spiral notebook labeled Northline Facilities. I would have ignored it if my name had not been visible on the open page. Adrian, replaced desk lamp before Thursday presentation. Beneath that was another note. Adrian, West heater still dropping after 6. Check again. And below that, oat milk before payroll close. He forgets to eat. I sat in Graham's desk chair and turned through the notebook. Most pages contained vendor numbers, inspection dates, and complaints about the third-floor plumbing. But my name kept appearing in the margins. Tighten loose wheel on Adrian's chair. Leave spare umbrella by West exit. Conference room too cold for his benefits meeting. Replace bulb before he notices flicker. Ask cafe to hold cinnamon packets. The notes stretched across almost 2 years. None were romantic on their own. Together, they changed the shape of my memory. The umbrella I assumed someone forgot. The warm conference room on a freezing morning. The lamp that stopped flickering before I filed a request. The coffee left near my keyboard during payroll nights without a name attached. I carried the notebook downstairs with the insurance folder. Graham looked up and saw what was in my hand. Every trace of ease left his face. "You found it. My name is in here more often than some contractors. I write down things I need to remember." "You needed to remember my coffee? You get headaches when you skip it. You noticed that?" He did not answer. I opened to a page from 11 months earlier. Adrian has presentation at 9. Check projector before he arrives. I remembered that morning. Graham had been standing at the back of the conference room, sleeves rolled up, testing the remote. He had left before I thanked him. I had thought he was simply efficient. Now I wondered how many moments of care I had mistaken for infrastructure. You could have said something. About replacing a light bulb? About any of it. You wrote down when I forget lunch. His jaw tightened. I expected denial. Instead, he looked toward the rain-dark window. You pay attention to everyone. Most people don't pay attention to you. The sentence landed so precisely that I could not answer. Graham continued, still not looking at me. You know whose child is sick, who needs time off, who can't afford the deductible. You remember birthdays for people who don't know yours. I thought someone should notice when you were tired. The room seemed smaller after that. I closed the notebook but kept my hand on the cover. Is that why you listed me? Graham's eyes shifted back to mine. Partly. What's the other part? He took a long breath. My family isn't an option. His parents had stopped calling after he came out in his 20s. His younger sister still sent occasional messages, but she had a husband, 2 children, and a habit of apologizing for being afraid of their father. Graham said it without bitterness, which made it sound worse. Friends? I asked. I had friends. Had. The tense stayed between us. He looked at the splint across his wrist. There was someone, Daniel. We were together for 9 years. Daniel had died 6 years earlier, after an aneurysm no one had known was there. One ordinary morning, Graham went to work. By evening, the person who knew where he kept everything and how he took his coffee was gone. Daniel's family handled the hospital, funeral, and apartment lease as though Graham were a close friend who had overstayed. I learned not to put my name inside other people's lives unless they invited me, Graham said, and I stopped inviting people into mine. I wanted to reach across the space between us, but his grief felt like a room I had not been given permission to enter. I looked down at the notebook again, at all the small ways he had entered my life, without asking to be seen. Then why me? Graham's good hand curled against his knee. For 1 second, I thought he would tell me everything. Instead, he said, because you were kind once, when you didn't have to be. I searched my memory and found too many moments that might fit, none important enough to explain the hospital form. Graham looked tired now, not from the injury, but from holding open a door he had spent years keeping shut. I set the notebook on the table between us. How long have you been taking care of me without telling me? His eyes met mine. The answer was there, unguarded and frighteningly tender. But Graham looked away before he could say it. He did not answer my question that afternoon. He asked for the notebook back, and I gave it to him because the way his fingers closed around it made refusal feel cruel. For the rest of the day, we moved carefully around what had almost been said. I answered emails at the dining table. He pretended to read on the sofa, though he turned the same page 3 times. Every few hours, I brought him water and medication. Every time, his eyes followed my hand as I placed the glass within reach. The gesture had begun to feel like a language neither of us had agreed to speak aloud. That evening, Graham told me more about Daniel. They had met when Graham was 20, lived together by 24, and spent nearly a decade building the kind of life people called ordinary only when they had never had to defend it. Shared grocery lists, Sunday laundry, arguments about the thermostat. Daniel filled rooms easily and made belonging somewhere look simple. After he died, Graham's family excluded him from decisions because the relationship had never been legally protected in the ways that mattered during a crisis. Graham moved out of the apartment they had shared within a month. Did you ever talk to anyone about it? I'm talking to you. The answer was so direct that I forgot to breathe. That doesn't seem fair. To you? To 6 years of grief. His mouth tightened. Grief doesn't care whether you're being fair. Loss had trained us differently. Graham learned to need no one. I learned to become necessary. Neither habit had brought us anywhere worth staying. The following morning, my phone buzzed while Graham was attempting to open a yogurt container one-handed. It was Theo Marsh from work. Theo designed hotel interiors, wore expensive sneakers untouched by weather, and had asked me to dinner twice. Still owe me dinner. Friday? Graham finally tore the lid badly enough to splash yogurt across the counter. Problem? He asked. Just Theo. Marsh? He asked if I'm free Friday. Graham wiped the counter with unnecessary concentration. You should go. That enthusiastic? You've postponed twice. You keep track of my dates now? No. I glanced toward the notebook on the shelf. Should I check the margins? Go to dinner, Adrian. There was nothing sharp in his voice, which made it sharper. He turned away and struggled with the trash bin. I stepped forward, but he said, I've got it. The phrase stopped me. It was what people said when they wanted help, but could not bear what accepting it meant. I agreed to dinner. Graham nodded as though the answer satisfied him, then carried the unopened yogurt to the refrigerator. He did not ask what time I would leave, or whether I planned to come back afterward. His refusal to ask felt less like indifference than punishment neither of us understood. By Friday, Graham could manage most of his routine. His headaches had eased, and he no longer swayed when he stood. I told myself that was why I should go. We had been pushed together by an accident. Whatever tension existed had formed inside medication alarms and temporary care. Theo was available, uncomplicated, and actually asking. Graham sat at the dining table while I changed upstairs. When I came down in a dark green sweater, his gaze moved over me once before returning to his laptop. You look nice. You sound disappointed. I'm concussed, not dishonest. There's soup in the refrigerator. Medication at 9. I can read a clock. You forgot lunch yesterday. You hid the bread. I moved it to the counter. His cursor had not moved. I waited for him to give me a reason to cancel. He only said, have a good time. Theo chose a restaurant with low lighting and tables close enough that everyone appeared more intimate than they were. He was funny, attentive, and easy to talk to. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed myself. Instead, I noticed the differences. Theo said exactly what he thought. Graham measured every sentence as though words carried structural weight. Theo touched my wrist when he laughed. I remembered Graham adjusting my scarf. Theo asked what coffee I liked. Graham already knew. Halfway through dinner, Theo set down his fork. You're somewhere else. I'm sorry. Is it the coworker? What coworker? The one you canceled for twice. He was injured. That isn't a no. Theo looked sympathetic, which made lying harder. I don't know what it is, but it's something. I thought about 2 mugs on Graham's counter, the notebook, and the way he had said, I'm talking to you. Yes, I admitted, it's something. Then figure it out before we order dessert. I paid my half and left before 9. Outside, I stood beneath the restaurant awning with my phone in my hand. I nearly messaged Graham that I was returning, then stopped. I wanted to know whether he would wait without being promised that I would come. When I opened Graham's apartment door, the lamps were on. He sat on the sofa in a soft charcoal shirt. 2 cups of tea waited on the table. You're back early. You made tea for 2 while expecting to be alone? He glanced at the second cup. Habit. You don't have that habit. You've known my habits for 4 days. You've known mine for 2 years. The words changed the room. I sat at the opposite end of the sofa. Theo knew I was somewhere else. You should give him another chance. Do you want me to? It isn't my decision. That's not what I asked. He rubbed his thumb along the cast. I want you to do what you want. That isn't the same as telling me what you want. Something unguarded moved through his face, then disappeared. I don't know how to do that without making it your problem. Let me decide what counts as a problem. He looked away. The next morning, he chose a navy shirt for his follow-up appointment and failed at the buttons. I stood before him and started at the bottom. Neither of us mentioned the previous night. His breathing changed as my hands moved higher. At the final button, I realized how close we were. His knees nearly touched mine. I could see the gray beginning at his temples and the small cut near his eyebrow. Graham's good hand closed gently around my wrist. I stopped. Did you want me to come back last night? Yes. The honesty landed between us, fragile and undeniable. Why? His gaze dropped to my mouth. He leaned forward by less than an inch. I did the same. For one suspended second, there was no hospital, office, or reason to pretend I had stayed, only because a doctor told me to. Then Graham released my wrist and stepped back. I'm sorry. For which part? For all of it. The retreat made something inside me snap. Why am I your emergency contact? He went still. I'm not waiting anymore. Why me? Morning light flattened the room into gray edges. Graham looked toward the window. Because I knew you'd come. I waited for more. None came. That's it? No. It sounds like it. Adrian. You knew I'd come, because I always come. Someone needs a form fixed, a ride, a meal, a person beside them, and I show up. That isn't what I meant. Then what did you mean? He opened his mouth. Silence followed. The voice of my former boyfriend returned, calling me dependable as if I were a well-made appliance. Graham had seen the pattern more clearly than anyone. He had written it down. He stays late. He notices everyone. You didn't choose me, I said. You chose the person in the office least likely to say no. Pain crossed his face. That's not true. Then tell me why it isn't. He could not. I grabbed my coat. Graham followed me to the door but did not touch me. You shouldn't leave like this. You're fine now. The doctor said you can be alone. I wasn't talking about the concussion. For one terrible second, I almost stayed. Then I remembered him stepping back before the kiss and the silence where an answer should have been. I returned to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and placed it within reach of his good hand. Even angry, I could not stop taking care of him. That was the problem. At the door, I looked back. Graham stood beside the table, staring at the glass as if it had accused him. You chose the safest helper, I said, not the person you wanted. He said nothing. I left before his silence could hurt me twice. Monday morning, Graham's desk was empty. I noticed before I reached my own. His monitor was dark, his chair pushed in, and the small toolkit he kept beneath the credenza was gone. I told myself he was still recovering. I told myself I had expected him to stay home. Neither explanation stopped me from looking across the office every few minutes. By 10, an email arrived from Human Resources asking me to update Graham Vale's emergency contact information. The new form had no name on it. I stared at the blank field longer than the task required. Graham had signed and dated the page, then attached a note in his careful block handwriting. Adrian, you were right that I should have asked before listing you. I am sorry I put you in a position you did not agree to. I have removed your name. You will not be contacted again. Graham. It was exactly the apology I had demanded. Clear, responsible, no excuses. It made me feel worse than anger had. I processed the form and filed it where it belonged. Then I closed the system, reopened it, and checked that his name had truly disappeared from my queue. The contact field remained blank. For the rest of the day, I corrected payroll entries, answered benefit questions, and pretended I had not been erased from a life I had accused Graham of forcing me into. He returned on Wednesday wearing a dark sweater over his cast. People gathered around him with concern and loud questions. Graham answered each one briefly. Yes, he was fine. No, the driver had not stopped. Yes, the police had taken a report. No, he did not need anything. He did not look at me. I kept my attention on my screen until the cluster dispersed. Then he crossed the office carrying a folder. He stopped beside my desk but left enough distance between us to make the space deliberate. These are the vendor benefit forms you requested. Thanks. The elevator contractor is changing plans in January. I marked the affected employees. I'll review it. His gaze rested on me for half a second. Let me know if anything is missing. It was the kind of conversation we could have had before the hospital called. Professional. Efficient. Empty. He walked away, and I had to grip the edge of my desk to keep from calling him back. The distance continued. Graham stopped bringing coffee to late meetings. He no longer appeared near my desk, unless a repair request required it. When we passed in hallways, He gave me the same polite nod he gave everyone else. I had wanted proof that I was not merely useful. Instead, I had made usefulness the only safe language left between us. On Thursday afternoon, the lamp above my desk stopped flickering. I had not filed a request. I arrived after lunch and found a new bulb installed, the shade adjusted slightly to reduce glare. I looked across the office. Graham was speaking with a contractor near the elevators. He did not glance my way. The following week, a fresh carton of oat milk appeared in the employee refrigerator before payroll close. There was no note. No one else in the office drank it. On Tuesday, rain began before 5. When I reached the west exit, an umbrella leaned against the wall beneath the coat hooks. It was the same cheap black one Graham had repaired months earlier, recognizable by the strip of gray tape around the handle. He had removed my name from his emergency form. He had not stopped noticing me. That realization hurt differently. Graham's care had never begun with the accident. It had existed before I offered him a ride, cooked his soup, or stayed awake beside his sofa. He had tightened my chair when I owed him nothing. He had warmed conference rooms without waiting for thanks. He had kept oat milk in his apartment long before he knew I would ever enter it. He had been giving to me while expecting nothing in return. I had accused him of choosing me because I was useful, but the evidence around me suggested the opposite. Graham had tried, clumsily and silently, to make my life easier without asking me to make his easier back. The emergency contact form was not proof that I meant nothing beyond help. It was proof that Graham had reached for the only person who had once stayed beside him without demanding access to his grief. The problem was not that he had trusted me. The problem was that neither of us knew how to survive being trusted without turning it into fear. Theo approached my desk on Friday with 2 coffees. He placed one beside my keyboard and leaned against the partition. I come bearing caffeine and questionable optimism. I looked at the cup. Regular milk, sugar, nothing cinnamon adjacent. You remembered I drink coffee. Most adults do. I laughed despite myself. Theo nodded toward the empty chair beside my desk. Want to try dinner again? No disappearing halfway through. No emotionally unavailable facilities coordinators haunting the entree. He isn't emotionally unavailable. Theo raised an eyebrow. Fine, he's extremely emotionally unavailable. And you? The question was gentler than I deserved. I looked toward Graham's desk. He was bent over a work order, cast resting beside the keyboard. The gray at his temples caught the overhead light. He seemed tired. I've been unavailable in a different way. Theo followed my gaze and understood. Then don't accept dinner because you're afraid the person you want won't ask. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm attractive and emotionally resilient. You forgot modest. I save it for second dates. We parted as friends. For the first time, declining someone did not feel like losing my last chance to be chosen. It felt like making a choice of my own. That evening, most of the office left early. Graham remained at his desk reviewing inspection reports. I stayed because payroll needed reconciliation, though I finished before 7 and kept the spreadsheet open anyway. Across the darkening office, Graham removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He reached for an empty water bottle, found nothing, and set it down. My body reacted before my pride could stop it. I stood, filled a glass in the kitchen, and carried it halfway across the office. Then I stopped. If I placed the water beside him without speaking, I would be repeating the same pattern we had both used to hide. Care given invisibly. Need answered without being named. Affection made safe by pretending it meant nothing. I returned the glass to the kitchen. Graham glanced up, but I was already walking back to my desk. That night, I found his apology in my bag. I had printed the email without remembering doing it. I read the sentence again. You will not be contacted again. Relief should have followed. Instead, I imagined another hospital call reaching no one. Graham waking beneath white lights and finding an empty chair because I had convinced him that wanting me nearby was an offense. I did not want him to need another emergency. I wanted him to call when he burned dinner, when the anniversary of Daniel's death made the apartment too quiet. when he found a movie I would hate, when he needed someone to complain about the elevator contractor, when nothing was wrong at all. That was the difference I had refused to see. Being useful meant appearing because a problem required me. Choosing Graham meant appearing when he could manage perfectly well without me. I opened the benefits portal from home and downloaded a blank emergency contact form. My own records still listed my mother, who lived 3 states away and answered calls only when she remembered to charge her phone. I printed 2 copies. On one, I wrote Graham Vale's name in the contact field and stopped before filling in the relationship. Coworker was no longer true. Partner was not yet mine to claim. I left it blank. The following Saturday, Chicago was clear and bitterly cold. I carried the forms inside my coat and walked to Graham's building instead of calling. With every block, I invented reasons to turn back. He had apologized. He had respected my boundary. He might not want me anymore. He might open the door and be polite. Those fears sounded familiar. They sounded like Graham deciding silence was kinder than risking an answer. I was done letting fear make choices for both of us. His building's elevator carried me to the 4th floor with the smooth mechanical hum he had probably complained into existence. I stood outside his apartment and listened. No crisis waited behind the door. No doctor had ordered me to stay. Graham's wrist was healing. His concussion had cleared. He could make his own coffee, reach his own shelves, and sleep without anyone checking whether he woke. He did not need me. For the first time, that was exactly why I had come. I held the 2 blank forms against my chest, raised my hand, and knocked. Graham opened the door wearing an old black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, his cast replaced by a slimmer brace. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. His surprise was quiet, a small loss of control around his eyes. Adrian, I know it's Saturday. I wasn't going to mention the day. You looked like you were preparing to. His gaze dropped to the papers in my hand. What are those? Evidence that I occasionally complete my own paperwork. He stepped aside. Come in. The apartment looked almost exactly as I had left it. The sticky notes were gone. The plates had returned to the upper cabinet. The glass I had placed beside him during our argument was no longer on the table, but I could still see it there. I remained near the door, because crossing farther into the room felt like claiming something. Graham waited. I had rehearsed several versions of this conversation during the walk over. Every one of them disappeared. You removed me from the form. You asked me to. I know. I thought it was the right thing to do. It was. His expression tightened, as if I had confirmed the ending he expected. It was also the easiest thing to do. He looked at me. You apologized. You gave me space. You stopped asking for anything. And somehow you decided that meant you also had to stop telling me what you wanted. I didn't think you wanted to hear it. You don't get to decide that for me. The sentence came out sharper than I intended, but I did not take it back. Graham folded his good hand over the brace. You were hurt. Yes. Because of me. Partly because of you. Mostly because you said one sentence and expected me to understand the years behind it. I should have explained. You should have asked. His eyes lowered. You're right. Stop making this easy for me. I don't know what you want me to say. The truth. He stood still. Outside, traffic moved below the windows, distant and ordinary. Nothing was collapsing. No machine was beeping. We had no emergency to hide behind. Graham walked to the kitchen and filled a glass of water. He placed it on the table between us. 6 years ago, I got a call from a hospital and learned the person I loved was already gone. I did not move. After Daniel died, I kept waiting for the next call. Every unknown number felt like proof that something else was about to be taken. I stopped listing people, because I couldn't stand needing someone who might not come. His voice remained even, but the effort showed around his mouth. Then 2 years ago, I had a panic attack in the records room. A memory surfaced. A half-closed door. Graham sitting on the floor against a filing cabinet, his face pale and unfocused. I had found him while searching for archived enrollment records. He had told me to leave. I had not. I brought you water. You sat outside the door for 40 minutes. You told me not to come in. You listened. I thought you needed space. I needed someone to stay without turning it into a scene. I remembered sitting on the carpet across the hall, answering emails, while Graham struggled to breathe behind the door. I had told him he did not have to explain. I would stay until he could stand. The next morning, I never mentioned it because embarrassment had seemed cruel. For you, it was probably a forgettable afternoon, Graham said. For me, it was the first time since Daniel died that someone stayed without demanding access to my grief. I looked at the glass between us. A week later, I changed the form. I typed your name and stared at it for 20 minutes. I knew I should ask. I also knew you would probably say yes, and I was afraid I would never know whether you meant it. So you decided not to give me a choice. Yes. The word carried no defense. I was wrong. I told myself silence protected you from obligation. Really, it protected me from hearing no. That was the Graham I had needed during our argument. Not a perfect explanation. An honest one. When I said I knew you would come, I didn't mean you were predictable. I meant I trusted you. I meant that when I was frightened and hurt, you were the person I wanted. Not because you fix things, not because you make yourself useful, because you are you. My throat tightened. You notice when people are scared. You make room without making them ashamed of needing it. You are kind when nobody is watching, and I have wanted you in my life for longer than I knew how to admit. The apartment went painfully quiet. I didn't choose you because you were the safest helper. I chose you because you were the only person I could imagine seeing when I opened my eyes. Every defense I had carried to his door became too heavy to hold. I set the forms on the table. I kept waiting for you to need me again. That was how I knew how to come back. I thought there had to be a problem I could solve. Graham glanced at the papers. There isn't one. You're healing. You can reach your own shelves again. You don't need someone checking your pupils or making bad soup. The soup was terrible. Thank you for protecting the emotional tone. The corner of his mouth moved. I stepped closer. I came because I wanted to. His expression changed then. Not relief exactly. Relief was temporary. This looked more dangerous. You don't get to decide I'd be better without you, I said. That choice belongs to me. And what are you choosing? I pushed one form toward him. His name was written in my emergency contact field. Graham stared at it. You listed me. I haven't submitted it. Why not? The relationship field is blank. His eyes lifted to mine. I didn't know what I was allowed to write. He looked down at the second form, still empty. Then he picked up a pen with his right hand. Can I choose you properly this time? The question was simple. No speech could have mattered more. Only if I get to choose you back. Graham wrote my name. Beneath relationship, he paused. What should I put? I moved close enough that our shoulders touched. Start with partner. His breath caught. Unless that's too much paperwork. He set down the pen. His hand came to the side of my face, slow enough for me to stop him. I leaned into it instead. The kiss was gentle at first, restrained by habit and fear. Then Graham exhaled against my mouth, and something in both of us loosened. His brace pressed awkwardly against my coat. I laughed into the kiss. He smiled, and the sound felt like a door opening. When we separated, his forehead rested against mine. I wanted to do that before the appointment. I noticed. I wasn't sure. You will ask next time. Can I kiss you again? Yes. He did. We did not solve everything that afternoon. Graham still went silent when emotion made him afraid. I still tried to earn affection by anticipating needs nobody had expressed. But we started correcting each other in smaller, kinder ways. When Graham wanted company on the anniversary of Daniel's death, he called and asked me to come over. He did not invent a broken cabinet or wait until I noticed the date. We ate dinner, looked through a few photographs, and let the evening be sad, without treating sadness like failure. When payroll season overwhelmed me, Graham did not quietly leave coffee and disappear. He sat on the edge of my desk and said, "You're coming home by 7. I told him he was not my supervisor. He said, "Good, then this is a request. I went home with him. Our coworkers learned about us gradually. Theo claimed credit for forcing me to leave dinner early. The office manager pretended not to notice that Graham's inspections increasingly ended near my desk. We kept work separate and affection mostly private, but no longer secret. Months later, my belongings began appearing in Graham's apartment. A sweater over a chair, 2 books on his nightstand, my oat milk permanently occupying the refrigerator door. He never moved anything without asking. One evening, while we washed dishes, he dried his hands and said, "Would you like to live here?" Not, "You're already here most nights." Not, "It would be practical." A question. I looked around the apartment that no longer seemed arranged for one person. "Yes," I said, "I would." The night after I moved in, I woke before him. Morning light rested against the windows, pale and quiet. On the table beside the bed were 2 glasses of water. Graham must have placed them there before we slept. I watched him breathe, then reached across the space between us and took his hand. It turned out being chosen wasn't about whose name appeared beside the word emergency. It was about who still asked you to stay when nothing was wrong.